In this session, we're going to examine control access and key systems. And I have a comment here, examining the complexities of managing doors, locks, and access in healthcare. Over the years, having worked in facilities for the better part of 20 years, um, it's amazing how much has changed and how, when it comes to keys, locks, and doors, how much energy and time is spent by maintenance and security and other departments, um, establishing, the right level of control and maintaining the systems that you have in place. And as you can imagine, over the many years that we've had buildings, things have evolved. And the way it generally is in most buildings, it's a hybrid. Unless it's a very new building, um, and even in new buildings, generally it's going to be a hybrid system. And what I want to do is I want to try to, just give you a nice overview of some of these main components of control access, and hopefully give you some insights that will help you proactively be ready to address or more critically think when addressing and dealing with control access systems, and truly, hopefully, improve. Um, the two facilities that I had, I can tell you that both facilities had issues when it came to control access. I can also tell you that both facilities improved when it came to control access. However, absolutely guaranteed, neither facility was truly, you know, strongly secure or in control for reasons that I'll mention as we go through this presentation. And again, it is one of those things as a facility manager, because when it comes to keys and it comes to control access, this is not something we do on a daily basis. Although I tell you what, technology is emerging today. We'll talk about that as well. We're going to talk about Wi-Fi, Bluetooth technologies and locks, and how that really is kind of bringing control access. It's bringing it to common vernacular and common knowledge. So it's interesting how the internet and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and those things, it's kind of taking technology that were pretty much reserved for commercial industry and making it really residential. It's actually pretty amazing what's happening in recent years. Um, I also wanted to take some time just to kind of give you some nomenclature, some of the language of of control access and systems, and again, hopefully share some insights that I've had over the years as it relates to this. I know that when you work, uh, when you learn this piece by piece by piece by piece, I mean, I don't know that anyone really sits down and goes over a comprehensive understanding of control access. I know that the assignment or the test that you have this week, which is based on pretty much a locksmith document. It's a very good document, which will give you a kind of a knowledge about keys and about key control and key structure that really I think is going to be very, very, very helpful for you in understanding some of the complexities, and actually, and really, in some ways, the ease in which you can control and organize your key system. So with no further ado, let me jump into this lecture. First thing is, when it comes to healthcare, we have a number of security sensitive areas, and this is an example of some of the major areas. And for obvious reasons, most of them. The pharmacy, obviously drugs and infant areas, protecting children and babies. The emergency department, which some people may or may not see that as a security sensitive area. It absolutely is, particularly when things start to go crazy after hours and during weekends and full moons. It can be one of those places you need a lot of control. Intensive care, again, for obvious reasons. Behavioral health. I actually got pharmacy on here twice. Oh, well, no big deal. Medication rooms, which are not pharmacies. These are often rooms that are distributed around the organization on nursing floors. Sometimes they are machines. Um, Sometimes also when we have remote locations, this often gets us in trouble because we'll have a remote doctor's office or clinic, and they sometimes tend to have looser control. And I've run into this problem over and over again, because there's medications, they have to be in some type of control access. Sometimes it's behind a locked cabinet even, but still has to be locked. Operating areas, information systems, which is something that has driven security even harder in recent years. Utility areas, I mentioned this one, mechanical spaces, things like that. Obviously, if someone were able to get into, a plant and they could really do some serious disruption and damage to the organization. And I mentioned this federal disaster drug catch because um, in both of my facilities, and I know it's in many facilities around the country, um, the government has distributed, um, drugs, and specifically, I believe most of these drugs are drugs that are meant to be used in case of some type of a biological attack where be some kind of a contagion, and these are inoculations, immunizations, and drugs that could be used in those situations. Some things may be related to, nuclear or dirty bombs. But in both cases, we had one. I remember it had to be obviously it had to be very secure. I remember there were motion detectors in the room. There was also heat and temperature detection in the room that ran back to some central office. And I remember there was a time or two where it got really hot in our area, and those rooms got a little warm. But they did call us and ask us to go into the rooms and to work on the temperature and the space or the environmental control. So these are just some examples. There are others as well, but we have a number of areas that we have to treat with extraordinary measures when it comes to control access and security, let alone the hospital itself. Under certain circumstances and situations, can become a security sensitive facility. Some of the issues that go on when it comes to control access is that we have lots of little issues as it relates to user behaviors. I mean, losing keys is a constant. Misplacing keys, collecting keys. Candidly, I've known managers to leave a facility with all their keys, and these are managers that have master keys, and we generally don't go back and remaster areas. Um, People share codes. This is a common occurrence. Sharing of badges. I've seen probably the most extraordinary circumstance I remember seeing is it had to do with a daughter who used her mother's badge, who worked in a nursery, to get access to the nursery to visit a friend who was delivering a child, and it was causing problems on the floor to boot. So, things like that. I've seen lots of different things when it comes to badge sharing or people obtaining other people's badges, which goes along with personnel not canceling badges. This happens all too frequently because of internal processes that break down or delay. Writing codes near doors. I mean, another common issue we see where people will actually write the code for the door somewhere on a door frame or around the corner somewhere close. And then this is similar to dealing with terminations and stuff, or not canceling badges, but sometimes we just don't change badges. This is another issue I've seen frequently where sometimes you'll have staff personnel that'll work in 2 or 3 departments, and then they still work at the hospital, but they no longer work in a department. They may no longer work in pharmacy. They may now work on the nursing floor, and we don't make the changes about taking them, giving them, taking away their pharmacy access and things like that. So this is common. It's a constant. We and I imagine a little maybe easier to manage in smaller facilities, but when you get to very, very large facilities, you can just imagine a lot of the headaches that go along with dealing with these issues and others. The maintenance and security challenges go along with this, just organizing and inventory control. In both my facilities, it was a process to get keys organized, and get doors inventoried, and to get things in control. But once it was done, things really got much, 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 much better. However, it seemed like it was always hard. It took a long time, and it took a lot of energy to get it where it needed to be. Time management and control access. I mean, going into these systems, making changes, adjusting things, validating, that the system is being kept clean, pulling reports, things like that can take time. And It's one of those things where, fortunately or unfortunately, I had the opportunity to manage both systems for a period of time, and in both of my organizations, was probably the expert on the system um, in both places, and had to often train staff or managers who came on, and never really actually, most of my managers never really truly developed a competence inside the system. Or maybe there was a time where I got a manager who was pretty good, and then of course something happened. He left the position, and it came back to me again. Choosing least cost options. Sometimes this can cause us a lot of trouble when we decide we're just going to do something that's going to cost that's quick and cost a little bit. Um, or we're trying to figure out what is the least cost option or what's the right option. In many cases, my experience has been that the cheap option is not the right option. Sometimes, it ends up causing us more problems down the road, and we end up having to change it anyway later. Um, which really kind of ties to the next one, which is not understanding system or subsystem capacity. One of the things about a lot of the current systems is that you have these cables that have they run all across your organization from some centralized or sub-centralized area, and they go to some type of distribution, if you will. We used to call them the pizza box, and that box had so many inputs or so many outputs it could receive. I could send and receive to doors and controls. And typically one box would manage maybe 4 or 8 doors maximum. And in order to expand it, if somebody wanted to expand to more control access in that part of the hospital, we would have to add a whole nother box, and then we would have to run and put another board, and then we would have to, you know, uh, add the readers and stuff at the door, and and the locks. And very often, people would start off by saying, "What's going to cost X dollars?" Not realizing they were going to have to expand all of the infrastructure to just get that one door in the system. Um, Again, this is one of those areas where you should, if you have a control access system, or if you're managing it, you should always know how many available slots you have into different parts of the building. And it's always good to kind of do kind of an assessment of your hospital, of your facility, and kind of get a sense of where there's a probability of having to expand or move more or put more doors in place. And what I often was able to do was it really depended when it depended upon what department would order the door. If it was, let's say, surgery or imaging or something like that, they didn't bat an eye for expanding the system. But if it was for a non-revenue producing department, like let's say maintenance or environmental services or security or something like that, then you were held to much tighter constraints. And I would use that knowledge to try to expand the systems at the right time so that we have capacity, in different parts of the building for the future. And it really worked pretty well. I mean, I can candidly tell you that I did that a couple of times. And so it was very easy to get access when I needed it sometimes, because when the infrastructure is there, the expense is not horrible. It's still, hundreds and sometimes low thousands of dollars. But when you're looking at a single door and you don't have the infrastructure in place, and you got $3,000 to $5,000 for that door, that changes everything. Um, Keeping personnel trained was also another challenge, an ongoing challenge when it came to control access. You just constantly have to retrain and train. And the thing about control access systems are that they often, well, not just control access, but even key systems and other systems, but mainly control access, is that there are some parts of that system you don't use very often. And so it's not something you're doing on a daily basis, and you have to relearn it every time. And again, another challenge is standardization. I mean, again, I mentioned that earlier in the intro. As the years go by, systems change, and you end up with a hybrid, and it can really be challenging to keep things, and especially when things are getting old and outdated. So these are just some of the challenges when it comes to maintenance and security challenge when it comes to control access and key control. Now we're going to jump into a list of some of the common control types. This is kind of the meat of the presentation. Keys, and again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on keys because you're going to spend a lot of time examining that document that on keys, which again, as I said earlier, is an excellent document. Manual push button, electronic coded. I think these There are a lot of these around, and you'll want to have a better understanding of these. Downloadable push button electronic code, which again are very so closely similar to the manual that it's almost not worth having two categories, but for the sake of distinction, I wanted to have two categories. And then the meat of the conversation, which is centralized control access. Um, and some of the elements we're going to talk about are key fobs, card swipes, proximity readers, biometrics, and I actually have another other slide that I might put in here too for some of the other pieces and parts. Bluetooth and Wi-Fi locks, which is again an emerging technology that I think really is going to be an excellent tool for the facilities professional. Key configuration, and again, for the most part, like I said, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. You know, you're going to go through some of this during your training, but you know, most systems are based on some configuration like this, where you have a grand master. I know that one of my organizations had a great grand master, which was that key was actually one of those keys that I don't think anyone actually had it. I think it was locked up, but grandmaster and master and submasters, and then keys specific to individuals is pretty much the way it's laid out. And this is just a nice little diagram. Key pros. I mean, typically we think of keys being a low cost. I often had to wonder about this because of all the lost keys that we had. I never really did get a real number on the cost of key. You know, cutting keys, making keys. You know, the time it took to do the keys, and things like that. But you know, once we got it under control, it was a lot less expensive. But when it was not under control, we spent way too much time trying to find keys and make keys, cut keys, and distribute keys and everything along with keys. But by and large, if you got something in control, it's pretty low cost. Training staff on key cutting, it's not too bad. I think that at my facilities, there were multiple people that were trained on it. In fact, most people kind of enjoyed doing it. I did it a few times and actually would like to do more of it if it was part of my competencies of what I did, but sometimes it was just kind of fun to cut keys. And again, I mentioned these are very excellent for small facilities. It's just really nice when you have a nice manageable small facility with just a handful of keys. When it gets larger, it just gets a lot more complex. Cons, and there are a lot of them. Lost keys, as we mentioned earlier, and keys not turned in, period. You know, easily lose control of inventory. And I've seen that over and over again. Just trying to maintain the inventory of keys and then trying to get it back in control is so hard. No tracking. You know, when people go in and out doors, you just don't know who's been in and out. There's just no way to know. Many keys are easily copied. There are some systems out there that you have to buy the keys in stock from the manufacturer, and each key is sort of serial numbered. Those are expensive. It's pretty good, but it is much more expensive. And those keys cannot be duplicated, but most keys used in most facilities can pretty easily be duplicated. Again, time and the ongoing maintenance related to it, and then staff training and poor key cuts. Sometimes, unfortunately, you know, the lock itself changes or the keys cut just a little bit wrong, and I've seen instances where keys have had to be cut multiple times to satisfy the user. And there are even times, I know you've all been to it, where it seems like we'll spend a lot of time having a bad insert or for a lock out there, and people have to just kind of hold their tongue right and push the key or pull the key out just right to get it open and closed. And I wish that you know we would be more responsive sometimes and just replace those locks before so many people complain about it. But I've seen that just too often where it takes a lot of complaints before sometimes we address locks around the building. Now the manual push button. This is a really common type and very easy to install device that's used in many places when someone just wants local control and they want something better than a key. And and these really are just, I think, a little bit better than a key. You'll often see these where, again, people they're carrying things an awful lot, or they go in and out a lot, and they just don't want to have the burden of keeping a key and having a key. I think we stretch the use of these too far. Very often we act like these are a lot better in terms of security than a key, and they really are not. In fact, they're worse. But we'll often put these in very insecure, sensitive areas. I've seen these in some pretty high secure sensitive areas knowing all the problems that kind of come with them. Some of the pros again are ease of installation. Again, one code for everybody, which is a pro. I mean, you give one code for the whole department. Um, but definitely lower cost than electrical wired systems, and again, minimize key issuing requirements. Easy to update, and you can still use a key to bypass if you need to. And they're good for temporary control of areas like construction and things like that. That's an area I think they're really great for when you have just short-term construction, and not really good for long-term, in my opinion. The cons, which are plentiful, but some of the main ones are, the code does get out. It always gets out. And again, going back to good for code for all, but also really bad that there's one code for all. Code does not get updated. In fact, I know you've seen this. If you've seen these around and you work in healthcare, so it's so bad sometimes that the numbers that are pressed are completely wiped. You can see what's been pressed over and over and over again, and usually it's a combination of a couple of numbers, and people can kind of figure it out. No tracking. Obviously you don't know who's been in, who's been out, and while it's great to have a key to bypass, the downside is a key can bypass. And they do wear out for high use areas. It seems to me that, again, very often this is one of those things where we try to fix it or adjust it and do other things, and it's really best just to replace them. But they do tend to wear out. The electronic downloadable push button, which is very, very much almost very similar to what we just talked about, except really it's just slightly. It is easy to install. You can create individual codes, which again is very nice. You can still use a key again, like the other one, and it is pretty easily updated. And that's actually, there's a little caveat to easily updated. I'll talk about that in a moment. And they're less expensive than control access systems and proximity type reader systems. The cons is again, you can still use a key. There's no real-time download or update. And really, that's one of the issues. While these are fairly easy to upload and download, they're just kind of out of sight, out of mind, and they're an inconvenience. It's like one other thing to do, and it usually falls to one of the last things we do on the list. So, you know, doing it is, the fact that it is fairly easy is one thing, but actually getting to it is another thing. And keeping staff trained to be able to upload and download. A lot of people, and I'm no different than this, that when you don't do something all the time and it's not like urgent, you'll tend to not embrace the relearning of it. And you see that very often where people just really kind of don't want to learn one more thing. And these are kind of like that. They tend to have their own little process and their own little sequence, and folks just don't want to grab the documentation, pull it out, and learn that process and sequence. I think this is a place where your computerized maintenance management system could be helpful, because if you had a nice quick set of codes and instructions and people went there for information, it would certainly make things a little easier than pulling out a piece of paper or finding a document. And codes can be loaned out. That often happens. It's just a common occurrence with almost any system. Now we're going to get to centralized control access. And again, this is just an example of a system that is anymore for those of you who are not familiar with, wide area networks or local area networks and how things work. This is just kind of a diagram showing that. Control access systems really have been the Cadillac, and they've been the, everybody, this is really the system that has been very, very, very effective, and it's given us a lot of improvements when it comes to key and control access. And they're wonderful. They're extremely reliable, although sometimes they can have some problems that can definitely be a headache. Like any computer system, when something goes wrong, they go bad, sometimes in a big way, and they'd be kind of hard to figure out. But that being said, most of these systems, they have a computer. That's how they kind of begin, is with a computer. And they often, matter of fact, let me get my laser pointer here. You always have some centralized computer system. Often the cool thing is you can have more than one, and it's connected to the internet, so you can actually be monitoring it from home, or maybe really truly anymore from your smartphone or any other kind of smart device, iPad. And then you have all of the interface equipment. And this is interesting here, because when it comes to your interface equipment, there's always the big question, where does this live? And by and large, it's been all over the place. I think anymore, most of the stuff obviously needs to live in the IT space. It has redundancy, it has security, it has the environmental control system, it has a suppression system. And that's something where it really needs to live. I know that sometimes security folks, like other departments, say, we want to have it's a security system we want in our security department or office or area, which I think is just not a really good idea anymore. There may have been a day when that might have been maybe a good idea, but anymore there really is not a good idea for it. And then you get down to these access control boards here, and this is what I was talking about earlier in the presentation. Each of these boards has so many inputs and outputs, and there's so many doors they can control. And what happens is, if you're not sure, let's say this area here goes to your west part of your hospital, your west wing, and you have this board, and it can control 4 doors, and you have, 4 doors that are on control access. And someone says, I want a 5th door. Well, what ends up happening is that you say, oh, I'm just going to price a reader. I'm going to price the mag and the locks, and maybe if I need an exit button or not. But I'm gonna price this out here, and then you end up thinking, oh, what's it gonna cost? Maybe $700, and then you come back and you find out, oh no, there's no more capacity here, and you end up having to get another board. And then these boards here are very expensive, 1,500, let's say, and then there's a box or not a slot available, so now you gotta have another box, and then you find out you gotta run power, and so this ends up becoming another $1,500 to $3,000 expense on top of the $700 or $800 you said it would cost to do it, because every other price, the other 3 doors you added were only $700 or $800, but you're at capacity. So it's just really one of those things you have to be very mindful of and know where your capacity is in your system and where it's not. But again, I think control access is actually quite wonderful, but you really have to have the ability to stay on top of it and have people trained in it. Some of the pros, as we talked about already, and I'll mention a few more again. Real-time information. I mean, it is really great to be able to use this. Unfortunately, it does get you in trouble because managers and directors sometimes will want you to pull information for them as they are trying to, particularly after hours and weekends, when it comes to them trying to find information about employees. That has always been interesting, but it happens a lot. Real-time changes, again, you can sit there and make modifications and change the system immediately. This comes in extremely handy, especially with HR issues and things like that. Scheduling is another really powerful part of these systems. If you want a different schedule for weekends or holidays or days of the week around the hospital specific to the door, it's, again, very easily done. Well, I shouldn't say easily done, but you have the ability to do it. Building limited access, and I have here the comment lockdown, which, just for your training and education, there have been several episodes over the years that have put healthcare into, quote, lockdown. Lockdown is a term that is a prison term, and in fact, when it comes to healthcare, we are not we interpret lockdown as we're going to limit people coming into the hospital, okay? But the public interprets lockdown as you're not going to let anybody out. And when it comes to healthcare, that's because of fire safety and life safety. That's not even a possibility. You do not have the ability to truly lock people in unless you're a behavioral health unit and you have protocol, procedure, and stuff in place for doing that. So I would just tell you, avoid the term lockdown externally. You might want to use it maybe internally, but I would say limited access is the better word, or restricted movement are better terms when it comes to this. But when you have control access, you can truly, certainly limit the access to your building in ways you can't, and quickly, than you can with anything else. Reporting is actually excellent when it comes to these systems. I always loved going through reporting. It's a lot of fun. I can't begin to tell you all the different reasons I had to pull reports for different reasons, but it was something that I just like looking at it and finding out. I think one of the times where I spent a lot of time with reporting is when we were going through a campus no smoking campus transition. And there was so many things that were coming up with that. People wanted to know if their smokers were going out certain doors on the weekends after hours, because they knew that if they were, there's only one reason they went to that part of the building, that was to smoke, on the loading dock, if you will. Um, but you're gonna definitely have the opportunity to pull reports. Remote access. That's another cool thing with centralized systems is you can get hold of it from anywhere else, and really, if it's integrated with camera system, I mean that's one of the things that I never really was able to do very much of. But the ability to integrate cameras with your control access is really cool, and I know some of you probably have that. I wanted it in many cases because it would have solved many, many, many problems for me. Um, just I can't begin to tell you. If someone swipes at a door and the camera turns on and is observing what's going on at that moment, or vice versa. If someone's leaving and the camera can come activate, that would have solved whether it was theft issues, whether it was HR issues. There were just a number of things where you didn't have information, and you knew if you had a camera pointed in that direction, you could have not spent any more time doing the investigation and just start moving forward on the interview. So if you have an opportunity to do some of that at the right places, it would make a lot of sense. Some of the cons when it comes to these systems, some of them are pretty obvious, but as it comes to these systems, expensive per door. It is not cheap, and it may be getting less expensive, I suppose, a little bit due to technology changes, but by and large, it's still pretty expensive as compared to a key and a lock. Um, Limited per door slash area. That kind of goes along with what I was saying earlier. You can only put but so many per output. It's not like you can put 30 doors easily without having to have. Now you got to have some kind of a room that's housing quite a bit of hardware. Again, goes along with that cabling limitations, getting to the spaces. Some of the most difficult challenge you have is we have a lot of concrete and brick and cinder and hard walls in our facilities, and just getting the cable. Obviously we have fire and smoke barriers and things like that too, and even dealing with infection control and prevention and length limits and on and on and on. It's one of those considerations that has to be understood going into the project. Getting into the door frames, the walls, has been one of the more those unanticipated delays and expenses. Who prints the badges? I mean, very often with control access systems, you have badges that have pictures, and dealing with that is nobody really wants to do it. To be candid, I mean, I've seen it tossed to security, I've seen it tossed to HR, I've had it in maintenance, and it seems to kind of bounce around from time to time. Um, it's nice if you have a security department that can handle it, but very often most hospitals don't. HR makes a lot of sense to me, but they certainly often don't want it, and again, often can roll down to maintenance as being responsible for it. Training and technology. Again, this is an ongoing issue. I think, in not just with this system, but with many systems, keeping staff trained, keeping your trained staff. When someone leaves, they often leave with a lot of knowledge. Um, and very often, unfortunately, if someone doesn't get trained up on the system, then you can pretty much be guaranteed they're not going to do much to train others to use the system as well. So, this is one of those things where when you get this technology, you do want to have several people trained. You want to have the right depth of training, and you really want to make it part of someone's job description and competency to be good at this, because I had to get involved way too often because individuals either were not trained or did not advance their understanding of the system, and then I would have to get back involved. It seemed like daylight savings time, I was always involved doing something, trying to correct issues with doors. Um, but that's another subject for maybe not another time. But I just remember that training was a big issue and an ongoing issue when it came to these control access systems. Some of the devices that relate to control access are card swipes, and this is what I mean a pro and a con, just kind of a flow of thinking here. These are still around. I'm sure you've seen them. They were low expense. They're kind of cheap, if you will. It's very cheap to just get these cheap cards, kind of like the ones you've seen in The quality of these are like the ones you get in hotels even. The nice thing about it, they're specific to the individual. Their credit card size is very portable. They're pretty light. They can be easily updated and taken off the system. And I say if the controller, the person operating the system, is told, which often doesn't happen as seamlessly as it should. They can be easily damaged. I mean, I've seen these damaged so many times in so many ways, and the readers themselves fail. And then the users often have issues when it comes to swiping. Some people are just super hypertensive, and they don't hold the card flat and run it smoothly through. It's too quick or it's at an angle, and you get lots of complaints and lots of follow up and lots of work orders because of that. And then I've seen issues where there is a problem with the card reader, but it's intermittent, and that's just more frustrating because you're going to blame the user, but it's the reader. And so that's with these swipes. To me, there are a lot of headaches with these. Keeping the system again updated is always a constant issue. And again, I mentioned the magnetic stripe failure. I'm sure there's other issues, but again, the nice thing about this is they're kind of the entry. If you have these systems, it's likely you have a centralized control access system, which definitely usually helps you, control the building. Proximities and fobs, these are very, very reliable, a little more expensive, obviously, and but they just work really well. And the way they work is the readers have power. They're sending out what they do is they bounce a magnetic electromagnetic signal off the card, and each card is tuned. It's like a tuned antenna with its own frequency. And same thing with the fobs. They're tuned. They're tuned with a very unique frequency. And when it hits it, it reads it back and it realizes, its unique ID. And they're kind of fun. I've had them X-rayed. One thing about these two, which is kind of funny, is that especially with the proximity cards, and this often happens when people like to put pins through them. Recognition pins, anniversary pins, all these little pins on their card to display them. Well, I always told folks not to do that, and I warned them that because that pin, if the little antenna, a little wiring antenna, that's tuned antenna that's inside the card, can be damaged. And of course, once it gets damaged, it'll fail. Also, extreme heat, leaving your card onto your dash, the heat can bend the wire. Sometimes extreme heat from a dryer can bend the wire inside there and change the frequency. So you try to warn people about extreme heat and temperature. They are a bit more expensive because of this. And you often go through the struggle, like, how much and when do you charge a user for replacing them? Typically, back in the day when I was doing the card alone, before you printed it, was about $3 to $5, plus the ink was another $3 or so. So it was like, it's $5, $6, $7, $8 to print a card. By the time you got right down to it, depending upon how bulk you purchased them. So, that's pretty expensive if people, lose them. So you have to figure that out, and you have to have somebody that follow through on that. And you have to be very cautious of duplication and sequence. These cards, they each have their own, again, unique ID, and you normally don't order but so many at a time. And if a very, very large organization, you could be issuing 10,000 cards, and they have a sequence. And then, once you go through, you may, print 10,000 and keep 500 or 1,000 for, new people in orientation and stuff like that. But what's going to happen is you're going to order more cards, and I've seen it where no one was really tracking the numbers, and they just ordered cards, not really understanding the sequence issue, and got duplicated sequences, which is a really bad thing to do. It just causes all kinds of other problems. And the cards can be loaned out. And the fobs can be loaned out. That's another issue as it relates to these. And I've seen that again all too frequently. But you have to be careful with. I guess there's not much you can do for it. One way, if you have really savvy security people, and this is the way I've found a few times, is that they'll know that somebody does not work the weekend, or someone does not work a certain shift, or someone doesn't even work in that particular building. And very often with these systems, when someone goes through a door, their picture comes up showing the door they're going through. And I've seen that as being one way where people have been caught loaning cards out or borrowing cards. So it's interesting what people will do with these cards from time to time. Control X biometrics, finger biometrics, hand biometric, retina, facial, voice, and there's even more things coming, bone structures coming, things like that. This technology has really improved, although it's one of those things where, I'm not sure how many of you have been using this, but there are a few ups and downs when it comes to it. Although I think it's definitely much more reliable and much more, if you will, secure. There are still issues with this technology. Expense is a big one. Um, and again, and I kind of have it down there a little bit lower. It says, technology range. You go to Cadillac. That's probably one of the biggest issues right now. People will say they have certain biometric technology, but they have very, very weak technology, and it may seem much more affordable, but it has so many errors in it. It's almost just worth not getting. I mean, it's not worth getting it. So, you can get very reliable technology with biometrics, but the expense of it is so high because it is so reliable. It's almost like not affordable. So you have to be careful and pick and choose where you use this technology. Um, Weather, sweat or rain or wet, on fingers. I'm sure those of you who use your finger swipe on your smartphones, know that when your hand is sweaty or wet or whatever, it doesn't read as well, and that could be an ongoing issue. Just getting the data in the system can be an issue. It takes time, and getting everyone through. That's always been one of the hardest parts when it comes to control access. And in general, it's the inventory process, like any inventory process. It's getting everybody. They don't all come at one time, and you can't get it done in a day or two. It's done, and you get like 80% done in mass, and then the other 20% takes as long as the first 80%. Um, and then you have a large data storage, so which means you have to have a larger, storage file, which is getting better these days. But when it comes to biometrics, it's so much more data that it's still large. And then there's the privacy issues. Some people just really don't want you to have their scan of their finger or their face. You feel like I guess people, and I might feel that way myself, feel like you're being fingerprinted for some kind of incarceration. So, but that does become an issue as well. There are other things as it relates to biometrics, but it's just something worth mentioning and making you aware of. Some of the other control access items I wanted to talk about. Exit detectors. These are these magnetic or infrared detectors that sense you as you're leaving the building or leaving a door. This has been another one of those. It's an active device that has lots of issues dependent upon. Again, I really don't know sometimes why these sometimes don't work the way they should. But I've run into it myself personally where I've walked to a door to leave and it doesn't open. I slam. I kind of bump into the door and I back up and I know to look up and I see the sensor and I move around and I try to get it to detect and I can see when it changes. Usually have lights on. It goes from green to red, and I can get out the door. But this has been a common problem. And then adjusting these, you can adjust the range of these. Another thing that relates to the detectors that is a problem is that sometimes they're adjusted in such a way that people walking down the hallway around a corner can open the door, thus releasing it to anyone who's standing outside. That is a problem with these as well. Kind of related, so well, not really related, it's different, but the manual release buttons. I mean, doors that are for fire egress need to have a backup manual release. You see these in other areas as well. What happens sometimes is some of these are like a pull station release. And what will happen is someone will pull it, and it's really not obvious that it's pulled. So people will say, hey, this door is not locking. And I've seen more than one time where staff have gone a long way around to try to fix a problem, replace detectors and do all kinds of stuff, work in the software, do all this, and then just to walk down and find out, hey, there's a release here and it's been released by someone, and no one went back and reset it. You would think that there'd be some kind of a error code saying that is released, but often there's not. Magnetic versus latching. This is a very interesting one. And sometimes it's very counterintuitive. At least it has been for me. Magnetic locks are very quiet and very powerful. I'm always amazed at how well a magnetic lock will hold a door. Whereas the mechanical locks and release, they work really well too, and they're kind of noisy. They actually, when you push on on a lock on a door that has the bar, you hear the clunk clunk and whatever. And when you do these with control access system and you use electrical to open the lock, it's pretty loud. Um, and sometimes it's a really good thing having that noise because in if you're not always looking towards the door, or if the door is off to, if you're even facing away from the door and you hear it clunk clunk, well, you know someone's coming in. Whereas if it's a mag lock, you might not even know someone's coming in. And I remember one of the most interesting conversations I had about this was before an ICU. And at the ICU, I really truly thought that they wanted the doors to be quiet and not loud because, it's ICU and it's for the patient's comfort. But they were adamant they wanted it noisy. And because they wanted to know every time somebody might be coming in if they weren't at the nurse's station. And I understood their logic and I understand it from a security perspective, but boy, after hours when it was really, really, really kind of quiet and people were trying to sleep, and there was still pretty a lot of traffic coming in out those doors, it was so loud. It just to me it was like, oh, that's just a big noise that's not needed. But that was why they did. They really wanted the security more than anything, and they wanted the noise of the door, which again was counterintuitive to me. Manual versus mechanical interface. Um, this is one of those things where, again, kind of going on what I just said, you have to make a determination, um, how you're going to interface your doors and stuff into your control access system. And okay, I gotta clarify on that. What we're talking about is um, the a lot of doors you have a manual um, lock and release, and you can dog them down, and you can do all the stuff with them. And some people still want to do that. I've had security people who want to like double down on it, rather than trusting or using the interface into the control access system. They'll still go through and they want to go through and lock the doors down, after hours, along with the control access system. And it's one of those things where if you don't unlock it and you change staff, it can cause you problems with the doors. So you have to kind of make sure you got those things squared away with the staff. Setting delays is another one. After a person swipes, there's a certain amount of time you want that door to remain loose so they can swipe, reach to the door, open it, and get in. Setting that time is a bit of an issue. I've seen it where that time has been too long, where someone can swipe, maybe it's 10 seconds, and they swipe the card, they open the door, they go in, and for another 5 seconds, the door is loose, and someone can come in right behind them. That's often another little thing you have to figure out, and it may even vary space to space and door to door. Door ajar settings is another one. Lots of times you don't get this message or alarm unless you have a sensor there for it. But I would encourage you to put these in place because, unfortunately, well, my experience has been maybe not so much anymore because of the smoking issue being campus free anymore. But lots of times smokers will go out a door and they will prop a door, with a piece of cardboard or something, and they don't always remove that propping, nor should they be doing that. Um, and something else to think about too is when someone else holds the door for others, is this a security breach? Do you want to know everybody that has come through a door? And I remember having this issue a couple of times, and in some ways it was a security breach. It goes back to smoking again. Um, when we went to campus free after hours. The quickest way to get to the sidewalk in front of the building was to go through outpatient surgery, which was completely shut down after hours. And the management was very, very, very suspicious that a lot of staff were going out and smoking, multiple times through the night. And they remember I had to pull a report. And what I ended up finding out was, interestingly enough, is that one of my security officers was holding the door for them after hours and letting them in after hours in mass. This was actually a coordinated effort where so they would not be identified, and he was assisting them in not being identified by actually he was a smoker himself by holding the door so we could not see them coming in and out of that door. It's just one of those things where you really kind of shake your head and you go, really? but that's what was happening. So again, when someone holds the door for others, is that a security breach? Is another good question to ask yourself. Now we're to Wi-Fi Bluetooth locks, and this, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I just wanted to touch base on this. This is really a cool emerging technology. You can now obviously use your smartphone to interface to many devices, and there are several locks out there in the market right now that will allow you to use your smartphone or any other device that has Bluetooth to interface to your locks. You can control your locks remotely. You can create. In fact, I'm going to talk about that in a moment, I guess. But you can do a lot of different things with them now. Which is kind of fun. And I'm really looking forward to this evolving because I think this is going to be an amazing tool for us if it isn't already for you who are out there working. And for some of the reasons why. Reason is because they're great for remote and smaller buildings. You know, you can easily now manage it if you get a new tenant in a building. You can easily remove the old tenant, put the new tenant in, and you program it that way. Now, granted, you may still have to have a key backup, but it can definitely, if you have technology savvy people, you can get around that key backup, and you can also reprogram the coding this way. So you can do a code, you reprogram it remotely, you can change it frequently, you can do it through a server or a computer in your office, and you can manage it and you can see who's been in and out and get reports, just like a control access system without all the cabling. And truly, it's less expense. It's a lot less cheaper. And I really think this is a scary thing for those companies that are traditional, if you will, legacy type systems, because I think this is the system that's going to lower the cost finally and make using some of this technology much more affordable and much more pervasive. I think this is a big opportunity for us here. Um, you can again, you can schedule guests, temporary or whatever. And one of the questions there are, most of these do have batteries in them, and that's a maintenance issue. They have to replace probably. I'm hearing about yearly, so that's something we have to keep our eye on. It's also based on usage, so maybe it could be much quicker. So that's one thing to keep an eye on. It is an emerging technology, and there's several people entering into it, trying to take advantage of this new market. Um, we already talked about interfacing and control access systems. I think that's something that's probably happening, and it's going to happen much more. And of course, it requires a Bluetooth device, which is one of those limitations. Well, I shouldn't say it does. Some of these don't actually. The Bluetooth device is what it requires, I guess, if you want to walk up to the door and never touch the door and it unlock for you, which I think is pretty cool. But also, I'm sure a lot of these, like you saw in the picture, has a programmable number, and I'm thinking, of course, you can program a number specifically to an individual for a temporary basis, which I think that's quite excellent. So this is a great technology that's evolving, and in fact, if some of you are using it, and in fact, it's good for home. I mean, obviously, this is really what it's being geared towards is homes, as much as commercial. But I'm guessing the commercial applications are just going to be, endless, and we're going to be able to get a lot more control and a lot more access and a lot more and better reporting of our buildings. So pretty exciting technology change. So in summary, there are many variables in many buildings based on age, and when it was built and how long it's been, in service and things. So we have many variables, and with the healthcare facility manager, the right plan and control can increase security and satisfaction. That's one thing that's pretty cool about these. You know, there always are a lot of security concerns, and they rise and they fall. You know, particularly in times of terrorism or particularly in times of civil unrest, things like that, or if there's been some kind of gang activity or shootings, or maybe there's even been a domestic violence situation where someone has been injured or even murdered within your facility. These, maybe a baby abduction. When those things happen, you can bet people get very uptight and very concerned, and they want to know what can be done. I could tell. I have a real good story about our emergency department and gang violence and shootings and things like that, where we made you know, 7 or 8 improvements that really brought a lot of satisfaction to that department. They felt so much more secure. And I think that when you do it right, people just feel much more secure. There's an opportunity to improve productivity with control access and key control. I can tell you right now, probably a lot of places are doing it the old way, or maybe they have no real way. They're just reacting. But if you can get control of this and you can bring it into management, you can do a lot more. You can free some time up, so you can actually do things that need to be done versus maintaining just old bad processes and old bad systems. Plan well and anticipate. I hope you heard that throughout this. Understand your system, understand your capacity, understand your expansion. Do a little bit of an assessment. Know where you think it might be going. Things like that. Um, and kind of along that lines with emerging opportunities, look at this new technology. I really believe it's going to give you an opportunity to again add satisfaction, get better control, and maybe even lower the cost that you otherwise might be spending with some of these legacy systems. Although I do worry that because these things sometimes don't interface, you might be just creating one more system to maintain. So it's just another tool. I think there's a lot of great things going on with this. I hope this has been helpful for you. Um, Again, it is one of those things where over the years, I really wanted to do this session because over the years, I spent periods of time where I spent many, many, many hours trying to get these systems under control and managed and addressing related issues that are associated with them. So again, different day one, that's the goal, and hopefully this is one of those things that will make you different day one as you enter into the world of healthcare facilities leadership and you manage the keys and the locks and the control access system of your facility.